And the reason I was going to bring this up, I was going to talk about soils a little bit, because the first time I met John, which was 4 years ago, he asked me what I thought was my greatest evidence for creation and against evolution. And it really goes back to this. All over the world, we see these layers, these lateral layers laid down by flowing water. This is something that I worked on, sediment transport, um, in my career. And, you see these finely laid layers. They can fool you because they're evidence of this sediment laid down by flowing waters. And you see this all over the world. So for the longest, the geologists would tell you that, well, for every, inch, that's about 100,000 years of deposition until Mount St. Helens happened. And then we saw the same type of patterns. And even those were laid down with these very fine laminations in the layers. So it gets down to your view, your worldview of how these processes work. Because originally geologists, John can talk about this a lot more, believed in the catastrophic processes. And then geologists changed with Lyell to the present is the key to the past, and that this uniform theory determined how these were laid down. And so after Mount St. Helens, well, it's very obvious that this is a view from the Grand Canyon, could have been all laid down at one time. And that is certainly my view. And one of the reasons is now, they go to, okay, well, we'll recognize that these were laid down very rapidly, but between these mega sequences, there's millions of years of missing time, because the worldview is you have to get the long ages in there. Well, there's a problem with that. And this was getting to what John's question to me was. And I felt like my number one evidence is the evidence for the flood, is this bioturbation and soils. If there was any time at all, then in between each of these layers, there would be channels developed in these layers. There would be soil developed. And the reason I say that is because Mount St. Helens happened in 1980. Well, I took a tour with other soil scientists of the deposits in 1996. And 16 years later, he was already developing soil profiles with this organic matter at the top, and even clays that had translocated down through the profiles developing in the subsurface. And because I've done a lot of research on worm, I used to do worm distributions under different type of conditions, different management systems, and looking at the worm populations. And you can see these tunnels developed in it. I also used to do a lot of infiltration studies and staining of the flow paths that water takes. And what you're basically staining is a lot of these ant channels. So where are all those channels? If there's millions of years of missing time between deposition events, where's the evidence for that? There isn't any. So it goes back to, what is your worldview? If your worldview is evolution, then you're going to have to force in something that's not there, that's not observed. But if your worldview is such as mine, then I see it, it's very clear. The evidence shows that there was a global flood. It goes back to a discussion I had with a leading geomorphologist, and he was making fun of those. I think I've shared it on here before, making fun of those that believe in the creation account. And I told him, I said, well, I believe in the creation account. And he was just flabbergasted. He was like, how you're one of the leading, geomorphologists, even though I'm not. In my area is soils and hydrology. But I turned it back to him. I was like, how can you be a geomorphologist and not believe in the creation account? Well, it all goes back to your worldview. And I believe the Bible is God's word. It's inerrant. And if we follow it, it's consistent with the scientific observations that we see, whether it's geology, biology, DNA, it's consistent.